They were not born soldiers, yet from the moment they were taken, their fate was sealed. Across villages and towns, children were seized in the name of empire, ripped from the arms of their families, marched away to be reshaped into living weapons. Imagine a boy who once played in the fields, now drilled to obey without hesitation, conditioned to kill with precision, and bound by oath to serve a ruler he had never seen. These were the Janissaries, the most feared soldiers of the Ottoman Empire, an institution both admired and dreaded. Their story is one of ruthless training, unmatched discipline, terrifying power, and a downfall as dramatic as their rise. The origins of the Janissaries lie in a system as brutal as it was ingenious. Known as the devshirme, or blood tax, it was a levy placed on the Christian subjects of the Ottoman Empire. Every few years, Ottoman officials would sweep through villages in the Balkans, selecting boys, often the strongest, healthiest, and most intelligent, to be taken away. Families watched in anguish as their children were removed, never to return. Yet there was a paradox at work. Some parents, knowing the opportunities hidden within this cruel system, quietly hoped their sons might be chosen. For while these boys were technically enslaved, they were also being given access to a life of privilege and power that peasants could scarcely imagine. The chosen boys were converted to Islam and forbidden any ties to their past. They were not allowed to marry, own property, or maintain contact with their families. In their place of origin, they were mourned as lost. Within the empire, they were reborn as instruments of the Sultan. From a young age, they were immersed in a world of discipline, drilled in obedience and loyalty until nothing else remained. The empire had devised a method of creating not just soldiers, but men who belonged entirely to the state. Unlike feudal knights, who owed allegiance to their lords, or mercenaries who fought for coin, the Janissaries were bound directly to the Sultan himself. Their existence blurred the line between slavery and elite service. They were denied personal freedom, yet elevated above ordinary citizens. They lived under strict codes that demanded purity of service, making them an army apart from the empire's ordinary troops. In the eyes of their enemies, they were symbols of terror. In the eyes of their rulers, they were a foundation of imperial strength. The devshirme thus created a paradoxical legacy. Through an act of coercion and loss, the Ottoman Empire forged an institution that would dominate its battlefields and influence its politics for centuries to come. Once absorbed into the ranks, the boys taken through the devshirme were placed in a world unlike anything they had ever known. Their lives became defined by discipline, obedience, and relentless training. From dawn until dusk, the routine was designed to strip away individuality and replace it with loyalty to the Sultan and unity with their brothers in arms. They slept in barracks, ate in silence, and lived under constant supervision. Every aspect of their existence served a purpose: to create soldiers who would not hesitate when ordered to fight, kill, or die. Their training was exhaustive. Each boy was taught archery, horsemanship, and swordsmanship until these skills became second nature. With the rise of gunpowder, they were among the first standing troops in the world to be systematically trained in firearms. Muskets and cannons were not simply tools of war for the Janissaries, they were symbols of their modernity and discipline. The sound of hundreds of muskets fired in unison struck terror into enemy lines, while the image of a regiment advancing without breaking formation made them legendary. Their ability to adapt to new technology was one of the reasons they remained so effective for centuries. Life within the corps was austere. Forbidden from marrying or owning property in their early generations, Janissaries were meant to be wholly devoted to service. This separation was not just a rule but a constant reminder that they belonged to the state, not to themselves. Their loyalty was enforced through rigid codes of behavior and reinforced by a strong sense of brotherhood. A Janissary did not stand alone. He was part of an order that functioned as one. Meals were eaten communally, rituals bound them together, and shared hardships forged unbreakable bonds. The corps became a family, one forged by force but sustained by shared identity. This identity distinguished them from other soldiers of the age. Whereas knights often relied on wealth or lineage, and mercenaries sold their swords for pay, the Janissaries were the Sultan's men alone. They were salaried, disciplined, and above all, loyal. This loyalty was not simply military, but ideological. They were raised to believe that their existence was tied to the empire's destiny. To outsiders, they embodied the might of the Ottomans. To themselves, they were the chosen, an elite apart from the rest of society. And in this closed, disciplined world, they became the most formidable instrument of power in the empire's arsenal. The true measure of the Janissaries emerged not in their training grounds, but on the battlefield, where their discipline and innovation altered the course of empires. Their first major test came at the Battle of Varna in 1444, where their steady lines and coordinated volleys of firepower crushed a European Crusader army. But it was less than a decade later, in 1453, that the world would come to fear their name forever. When Sultan Mehmed II laid siege to Constantinople, the Janissaries stood at the heart of the Ottoman assault. As the ancient walls trembled under cannon fire, it was the relentless charge of the Janissaries that breached the city. Their reputation was sealed. They were the soldiers who ended the Byzantine Empire and ushered in a new era. From that moment on, their presence became synonymous with Ottoman power. In campaign after campaign across Europe, the Middle East and North Africa, they acted as the Sultan's spearhead. Unlike feudal levies or mercenary bands, the Janissaries represented permanence, a professional corps that could be relied upon in every conflict. Their ranks were uniform, their tactics modern, and their loyalty unwavering. To many in Europe, the very sound of their marching drums was enough to evoke dread, a reminder that the empire's most formidable warriors were near. Their rise was not only military, but also political. Because they were directly tied to the Sultan, the Janissaries became a force within the empire itself. They were salaried soldiers, paid regularly from the imperial treasury, which elevated them above ordinary troops who often relied on plunder or irregular stipends. Their privileges grew as their victories accumulated. In the capital, they were recognized as a distinct and honored order, exempt from certain laws, and accorded a status that blurred the line between servant and master. In some cases, their influence extended into court politics, for sultans relied upon their loyalty to secure their rule, while rivals feared their disfavor. Yet, it was their battlefield record that gave them enduring prestige. Accounts from both Ottoman chroniclers and their enemies describe their ability to hold a line under fire, to storm fortifications with relentless determination, and to fight with a unity that few other armies of the era could match. In contrast to the disorder of many medieval levies, the Janissaries represented order, discipline, and inevitability. Wherever they marched, they carried not just weapons, but the reputation of invincibility. By the late 15th century, the name Janissary had become a byword for fear, a symbol of the Ottoman Empire's seemingly unstoppable advance. The Janissaries were feared not only for their victories, but for the aura that surrounded them. To face them in battle was to confront soldiers who had been shaped from childhood into instruments of war. Their discipline on the field was legendary. They advanced in perfect formation, shoulder to shoulder, muskets raised in unison. At the command, entire lines of Janissaries fired together, unleashing walls of smoke and thunder that shattered enemy morale before swords were even drawn. It was not only the devastation of their weapons, but the psychological weight of their presence that unnerved opponents. Chroniclers describe armies breaking at the very sight of their banners and hearing the pounding rhythm of their war drums echoing across the fields. This fear was reinforced by their reputation for ruthlessness. When ordered to storm fortifications, they did so without hesitation, indifferent to casualties. In sieges, they were often the first through the breach, carving paths through defenders with brutal efficiency. For enemies, their relentlessness made them appear almost inhuman, as if nothing could break their resolve. For the Ottomans, this ferocity was the embodiment of loyalty, men who would sacrifice themselves for the Sultan's cause without question. The story of the Janissaries is one of extremes. Born as enslaved boys, they rose to become the most feared soldiers of their age, the backbone of an empire that stretched across 3 continents. Their discipline and loyalty made them legendary, but their hunger for privilege and power transformed them into a threat to the very state they once protected. For centuries, they embodied both the promise and peril of centralized authority, proof that an army forged in obedience could conquer nations, yet also proof that unchecked power corrupts even the most disciplined ranks. Their destruction in 1826 ended not only a military tradition, but an entire chapter of Ottoman history. They were feared by enemies abroad, feared by their people at home, and ultimately feared by their masters. In their rise and fall lies the paradox of empire. How strength, if left untempered, can become its own undoing.